Being on the same page, not an easy thing. I'm excited that you're working on developing a game plan. Mission, vision, values, sometimes they sound like so many buzzwords, but it really does matter that we understand that we're singing from the same songbook, from the same page, and from the same line. When you talk about agenda harmony, it really does assume that there is a melody line that the team's working from together. How do you get there, though? It's wonderful when everybody's listening and you hear the tune and everybody's in sync, but how do you get there? Well, certainly in an organization, that idea of having a vision, a clear picture of what the preferred future would be, what it would look like if, in fact, we accomplished our mission. And that assumes the mission is clear, that we really know why we exist. For churches couldn't be any more plain than the Great Commission. In fact, if we don't exist to fulfill the Great Commission, we really have forfeited our right to exist as a church. Values, well, those are the things that guide how we'll do life together. Those are the boundaries. That's where we throw a flag or blow the whistle. You're out of bounds on that play. But the idea of agenda harmony, it really does speak to me of how do you align the resources? How do you bring people together? Having things in writing certainly matters. Having the conversations, having church chats, having leadership retreats, all of those are key components to discussing what it would look like if we fulfilled God's purpose for our church, in our community, in our generation. I do think, though, one of the most critical factors in creating agenda harmony is aligning resources. Now, aligning your budgets. You say your mission is one thing, but does your budget reflect that? Does your church calendar reflect it? And ultimately, leader, it comes down to this. Let's be honest. One of the dirty little secrets about ministry is that you have incredible amounts of discretionary time, certainly compared to other professionals or people who might work in certain offices or certain industries. You have discretionary time. You've been entrusted with that treasure. Your church, your ministry pays you a salary. Now, there are certain expectations for meetings and preparing a message. But I was with a group of pastors recently, and they said that they had as many as 10, sometimes even 20 hours in a given week that they got to decide what to do with. Can I tell you, I don't believe there's anything more strategic you can do in leadership than model what the priorities are. If you say you want your church to be missional, how missional are you in your discretionary time? Do you play basketball with the guys in the neighborhood? Or do you participate in the Chamber of Commerce? What is it that you personally do? What stories can you tell of how you've lived out the mission, the vision, the values of your church? And then to bring other people along in that journey with you, to help them to see the stories and to live the stories and be part of that journey. Agenda harmony, it is critical to have your team on the same page, singing the same melody in the same meter, listening to one another, working together, aligning our energies, our resources, so that we can accomplish the Great Commission purposes that God's called us to. You can do it. Lead by example. That makes the difference. Now, the idea of creating a vision sometimes can seem really complicated and very technical, but let me just encourage you. Think about vision as the picture of what it would look like if we accomplished our mission together. And give it a timeline. Imagine 5 years from now. What would it look like if your church, your ministry, fully leaned into, embraced the mission that God's given you, fulfilled the purposes of God in your setting, in your context? One of the fun ways to do that, and I've done this often with groups, is to sit down and just have people begin to write out some paragraphs, some ideas. If you were a newspaper reporter interviewing people from your church or from the community 5 years from now, what would they say has happened? What would they see as the impacts of your church, of your ministry, if you had fully embraced all that God has called you to? How many people's lives would be changed? How many people would worship with you on a given weekend? What kinds of ministries and programs? What would be the sights? What would be the sounds? What would be the impact in the community? How many fewer teenage pregnancies? How many fewer homeless people? What would it look like? And to begin to write that story in the past tense. Well, in the last 5 years, because of the ministry of this church, here's what's happened in our community. Here's how this church has changed. Here's what's true today, because this church lived out its vision. When people begin to see that picture that clearly, it energizes them in the moment. What decision do I make today to help bring that future picture into reality? How do I lean into that? How do I live into that moment by moment to make a difference? And to bring the team together in that agenda harmony. Harmony, it is that thought of music, of people in sync together. I think one of the critical components of developing that is not just telling people what you think the agenda should be, but listening deeply to what they already are hearing, what God's saying to their hearts. I certainly found this to be true both as a pastor, later as a district superintendent. And here in the last 18 months at Kingswood University, one of the critical things I think I did right was to take the time to listen. I listened to every single freshman student who came in. I listened to all of our graduating seniors, 30-minute interviews with every one of them. I listened to every faculty member, every staff member. I've listened to pastors in the area. I've listened to our trustees. It's as we come together and have this sense collectively, this mosaic where everyone has a part of the puzzle, but we're listening to say and to hear what God is saying and speaking to one another openly, probing, going deeper with that. But ultimately, as we listen, in that harmony, it emerges. You see the themes. You begin to hear the constants. One of the themes for us, for example, here at Kingswood was this idea of servant leadership. Our ministry teams, as they were in youth camps or in conventions, the word that came back to us was how they had a servant spirit. When we look back at the history of the school since 1945, so many of our graduates have gone on to serve in mission fields, often in some of the most difficult places in the world, and they've done it with a servant heart. So when we capsuled that, when we tried to put that in a phrase, what we came up with was our mission is to equip Christ-like servant leaders for global impact. Servant leaders, the heart of it, that agenda harmony has been energizing us, but that really emerged, that bubbled up, it became true. It was already there in the fabric, but to listen for it, to repeat it, and to bring it together makes a huge difference for your team. There are those themes. Listen for them and then begin to write them down, begin to speak them out. There is an agenda, and when we're on the same page, it is a powerful thing.